In this presentation, we will discuss school food service meal patterns as they relate to the National School Lunch Program. The Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act requires school meals to reflect the recommendations of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. These science-based standards are set to ensure schools are providing wholesome meals that will optimize health and academic achievement. Memo SFS 19-27, the final rule, updated the meal patterns and nutrition standards for the National School Lunch and School Breakfast programs. This rule requires most schools to increase the availability of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and fat-free and low-fat fluid milk in school meals, to reduce the levels of sodium, saturated fat, and trans fat in meals, and meet the nutrition needs of children within their caloric requirements. These improvements to the school meal programs, largely based on recommendations made by the Institute of Medicine of the National Academies, were expected to enhance the diet and health of school children and help mitigate the childhood obesity trends. The National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program requirements are designed to provide age-appropriate meals to specific age grade groups. For K-12, dietary specifications for calories, sodium, and saturated fat are in place to limit the risk of chronic disease. Let's look at a brief overview of the general requirements for lunch. Meals are based on a food-based menu planning approach. This approach simplifies menu planning, serves as a teaching tool to help children choose a balanced meal, and ensures that students nationwide have access to key food groups recommended by the Dietary Guidelines. Schools use 3 same age grade groups for planning lunches: grades K-5, 6-8, and 9-12. These age grade groups provide age-appropriate meals. There are daily and weekly serving size requirements for each food component in the meal patterns. There are also daily and weekly dietary specifications for calories, saturated fat, and sodium. In addition, all foods must contain 0 trans fat. Flexibilities. Memo SP 38, 2019, Meal Requirements under the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program, Questions and Answers for Program Operators, is a great resource for program operators who may have specific questions about components or other meal pattern concerns. Memo SFS 19-27 is the final rule, which covers permanent flexibilities for fluid milk, whole grains, and sodium. The final rule allows for low-fat flavored milk to be served in school meals and removes the requirement that flavored milk has to be fat-free. The final rule requires that half of the weekly grains in the school lunch and breakfast menu be whole grain rich, thus ending the need for the exemption process. And finally, the final rule extends the timeline for sodium reduction in school meals. By codifying these changes, USDA acknowledges the persistent menu planning challenges experienced by some schools and affirms its commitment to give schools more control over food service decisions and greater ability to offer wholesome and appealing meals that reflect local preferences. First, we will need to distinguish 2 important terms: food components and food items. A food component is one food group that contributes to a reimbursable meal. All components are required to be offered at their respective meals in order for the meals to be reimbursable. The food components for breakfast are fruit, grains, and fluid milk. Food items, on the other hand, are a specific food within a food component. For example, a muffin is a food item within the grains component. The National School Lunch Program meal pattern requires that all 5 components must be offered daily. Meat alternate. For lunch, meat alternate is a required component, unlike with the school breakfast program. Grains, fruit, vegetables, and milk. Here is the overview of the component, calorie, saturated fat, and sodium requirements for lunch by age grade groups. There are daily and weekly requirements for meat alternates and grains. There are daily requirements for fruits, vegetables, and milk. There are also calorie ranges for K-5, 6-8, and 9-12 age grade groups. As a reminder, there is no option to do a combined K-12 age grade group for the National School Lunch Program, like for the school breakfast program. The fruit component requires a half a cup of fruit per day minimum for K-5 and 6-8. Requirements double for 9-12 at 1 cup. Vegetables have a 3/4 cup daily requirement for K-5 and 6-8. However, 1 cup is required for 9-12. Meat and meat alternates have a daily minimum requirement of 1 ounce equivalent with increased weekly requirements. 9-12 has a 2 ounce daily minimum requirement. Grains have a 1 ounce equivalent requirement daily for all age grade groups, but different weekly requirements. K-5 require 7 to 10 ounces over the week. 6-8 require 8 to 10 ounces over the week, and 9-12 requires 9 to 10 ounces over the week. As a reminder, this is based off of a 5-day school week. Weekly requirements are adjusted accordingly for a 4-day school week. Milk is a 1 cup per day requirement for all age grade groups offered in a variety of fat-free or low-fat milk options. As again with breakfast, the nutrition standards that include calorie, saturated fat, sodium, and 0 trans fat are also part of the meal pattern requirements for the National School Lunch Program. What is the minimum volume and weight requirements for meal components? For meat alternates, it's 0.25 ounce equivalents. For grains, it's 0.25 ounce equivalents. For fruit and vegetables, it's 1/8 cup. For fluid milk, it's 8 ounces for K-12, 6 ounces for ages 3-5, and 4 ounces for ages 1-2. The fruit component. Fruit is a required component in both breakfast and lunch. Schools may offer fruits that are fresh, frozen, dried, or canned in light syrup, water, or fruit juice. Pasteurized, full-strength fruit juice may also be offered to meet up to 1/2 of the fruit components over the week. The meal patterns specify the required quantities for fruit in each age grade group. Fruit and gelatin may not credit unless visible fruit is also present in the gelatin. Dried fruit credits as twice the volume of the fruit. For example, 1/4 cup of raisins credit as 1/2 cup of fruit. Fruit juice must be pasteurized, 100% full-strength juice, and can either be from concentrate or not from concentrate. How do you know that juice is 100%? Look for the name on the label to include the words juice, full-strength juice, 100% juice, reconstituted juice, or juice from concentrate. Juice concentrates can be used only when reconstituted with water to 100% full-strength juice and can be credited in the forms of liquid or frozen juice only. Therefore, juice cannot credit towards the fruit component when used as an ingredient in other food or beverage products. For example, gelatin made with juice does not credit as a juice since the fruit juice is no longer in the form of liquid or frozen juice. The Food Buying Guide provides additional crediting information. The weekly juice limit is calculated based on the amount of fruits that students are allowed to select at a given meal, regardless of the number of options or varieties of fruits available. Menu planners must calculate the menu's compliance with the weekly juice limit separately for fruits by dividing the total weekly amount of fruit juice that students can select by the total weekly fruit offerings. When calculating the total amount of juice that students can select, menu planners must count all sources of 100% fruit juice served during the week. This includes juice that is fresh, frozen, or made from concentrate, frozen juice pops made from 100% fruit juice, and pureed fruits or vegetables in the fruit-vegetable smoothies. Canned fruit and light syrup or water does not count towards the weekly juice limit. What does it look like for half of the fruit component to be met by juice over the course of a week? In this instance, each day the SFA offers a half a cup of fruit in the form of applesauce and other whole and canned fruit items, as well as half a cup of fruit juice. This is equal to 2.5 cups of whole fruit over the course of a week and 2.5 cups of juice over the course of a week. In this scenario, the SFA is offering 50% of the fruit component as juice over the week. The juice limit requirement applies to both breakfast and lunch. Next, we will talk about the vegetable component. Menu planners may offer vegetables in the form of fresh, canned, frozen, and/or juice. There are daily minimums, weekly minimums, and weekly subgroup minimums. Although juice can be offered at lunch, no more than 50% of vegetable offerings may be in the form of juice. In addition to the 5 subgroups, there is another category for additional vegetables that can come from any one of the subgroups to meet the weekly total. This group is for additional vegetables that are needed to add up to the total weekly requirement for each grade group. This additional category is not the same as the other vegetable subgroup. 1/8 cup of vegetables is the minimum amount that can be credited to meeting part of the vegetable component. Uncooked leafy greens will credit as half the volume when served. For example, 1 cup of romaine lettuce is creditable as 1/2 cup of dark green vegetables. The 5 vegetable subgroups are the same as the recommended subgroups in the 2010 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. The subgroups include vegetables based on their nutrient content. The vegetables in each subgroup have similar nutrient content. Color is generally a guide to where a vegetable belongs, but it does not always determine the subgroup. For example, broccoli and green beans are both green, but broccoli is in the dark green subgroup and green beans are in the other subgroup because they provide different nutrients. It is important to know what vegetables belong in each subgroup so the meal pattern is planned to meet the weekly requirements and appropriate substitutions can be made if needed. For example, if a vegetable is missing from today's produce delivery, food service staff need to know what other vegetables are in the same subgroup so they can make appropriate substitutions. Menu planners must adhere to both the daily minimum requirements for vegetables and the weekly minimum requirements for vegetable subgroups. The subgroups are dark green, red-orange, beans, peas, and legumes, starchy, other, and additional. The other subgroup includes items like beets, cauliflower, cabbage, and onions, but can also include extra items from the dark green, red-orange, or legume subgroups. The starchy vegetable subgroup is the only subgroup which cannot count as an other vegetable. Additional vegetables may include vegetables from any of the vegetable subgroups, including starchy. Raw and cooked leafy greens credit differently. Raw leafy salad greens credit as half the volume served, which is consistent with the dietary guidelines for Americans. For example, a half a cup of romaine lettuce contributes to 1/4 cup toward dark green vegetable subgroup. Cooked leafy greens such as sautéed spinach are credited by volume as served. For example, a half cup of cooked spinach credits as a half cup of dark green vegetables. Menu planners can decide how to incorporate beans and peas into the school meal. These foods may count towards either the vegetable or meat alternate component. However, schools cannot offer one serving of legumes and count it towards both food components during the same meal. Legumes can be offered as either component in different meals. For example, a serving of refried beans can be offered as a vegetable at one lunch and a meat alternate at another lunch. The refried beans offered as a vegetable count towards the weekly beans and peas subgroup requirement, but do not count towards the minimum weekly meat alternate requirement. If a meal includes 2 servings of legumes, the menu planner can choose to count 1 serving as a vegetable and 1 serving as a meat alternate. For example, a meal contains a salad with garbanzo beans and chili made with kidney beans. The menu planner may count the garbanzo beans as the vegetable component and the kidney beans as the meat alternate component. While beans and peas must be offered weekly in the minimum portion necessary to meet the vegetable subgroup requirement, the menu planner may choose to offer them more frequently. When beans and peas are offered multiple times on the menu planner may choose whether the additional offerings are to be credited towards meat or vegetable, but never both within a given meal. The crediting of vegetable mixtures depends on the types and amount of vegetables provided. Vegetable combinations from the same subgroup count toward that single vegetable subgroup. For example, a mixture of carrots and sweet potatoes would credit as a red-orange vegetable subgroup, and a mixture of corn and green peas would credit as a vegetable starchy subgroup. Vegetable combinations that contain 1/8 cup each of different vegetable subgroups may credit each one toward the appropriate subgroup. For example, a mixture of 1/4 cup of carrots and 1/4 cup of corn credits as 1/4 cup of red-orange vegetable and 1/4 cup of starchy vegetable. Schools may use manufacturer-provided data that clearly documents the ratio of vegetables in the ingredients listed and credit the amount toward each vegetable subgroup requirement. For example, if a mixture of 25% broccoli, 25% carrot, and 25% cauliflower, then a 1 cup serving of this blend would credit 1/4 cup dark green, 1/4 cup red orange, and 1/2 cup other. If documentation doesn't exist, program operators can estimate how much of each subgroup is in a vegetable mixture and credit it towards the appropriate subgroup. At least 1/8 cup vegetable must be present to credit toward a subgroup requirement. If the quantities of the different vegetables are not known, the vegetable mixture can credit toward the additional vegetable requirements for the week. Menu planners should use the USDA Food Buying Guide for Child Nutrition Programs to determine how to credit different items within their component groups. For example, how do you know how much of an orange to serve to provide half of a cup of fruit? 1 orange is not necessarily a half cup of fruit. It depends on the size of the fruit. The Food Buying Guide tells us that a 138 count orange equals a half a cup of fruit, and a 125 count orange or a 113 count orange equals 5/8 cup of fruit. The Food Buying Guide also tells us that there are no whole oranges that provide 1 full cup of fruit. Now we will discuss the meat alternate component. Meat products without binders and extenders credit on an ounce per ounce basis. This means that 1 ounce of the meat product provides 1 ounce equivalent of meat alternate. Meat products with binders and extenders credit based on the actual amount of meat without the weight of binders and extenders. For example, if a turkey sausage weighs 1 ounce and contains modified food starch as an ingredient, it cannot credit as a 1 ounce equivalent of meat alternate. This product would credit based on the actual percentage of meat in the product formula. To determine this information, schools must obtain a product formulation statement or a child nutrition label. To credit based on actual serving weight, luncheon meats, cold cuts, and hot dogs must be all meat without binders or extenders or added ingredients such as water or meat broth. The serving sizes for meat alternates are provided in ounce equivalents, which is the amount of meat or meat alternate that is equivalent to 1 ounce of cooked lean meat, poultry, or fish. For example, 1 ounce equivalent of meat equals 1 ounce equivalent of lean meat, poultry, or fish, 1 ounce of cheese, a 1/4 cup of cooked beans and peas, a half of a large egg, 2 tablespoons of nut or seed butters, 1 ounce of nuts or seeds, 2.2 ounces of tofu, a half cup of yogurt or soy yogurt, and 1 ounce of alternate protein products. When schools use commercially prepared foods such as pizza, chicken nuggets, cold cuts, and burritos, the menu planner must ensure that each product provides the appropriate amount of meal pattern components being credited. For example, if the menu includes a commercially prepared burrito to meet the meat alternate component, the menu planner must know the specific amount of meat, beans, and cheese in 1 burrito. To credit as a meat alternate, commercially prepared foods that are processed or contain added ingredients must either have an original child nutrition label for the product or a product formulation statement signed by an official of the manufacturer stating the amount of each meal pattern component contained in 1 serving. Without this documentation, schools cannot use commercially prepared products to credit towards the meat alternate component. The USDA Child Nutrition Labeling Program is a voluntary labeling program. It allows food manufacturers to indicate a standardized food crediting statement on their product labels approved by USDA. Child nutrition labeling provides a warranty that the product contributes to the meal pattern requirements as printed on the label. Products eligible for child nutrition labels include main dish items that contribute to the meat alternate component. Examples include beef patties, cheese or meat pizzas, meat or cheese and bean burritos, egg rolls, and breaded fish portions. Vegetables, grains, and fruits must be combined or pre-plated with the meat alternate to be eligible for child nutrition labeling. If the product includes vegetable subgroups, the CN label will document the credible amount of vegetable subgroups. For example, the cheese pizza with tomato sauce and vegetable toppings on this slide indicates that each 5-ounce pizza provides 2 ounces of meat alternate, 1/4 cup of vegetables, and 1.5 servings of bread grain. This slide may look a little overwhelming. The point is to encourage you to always ask for product formulation statements or child nutrition labels for your meat products. Often schools credit cold cuts incorrectly because of the binders and extenders included in the food product. When there are binders and extenders added, the product may not credit ounce per ounce as if the product were 100% meat. Let's look at some examples of serving sizes for meats with added ingredients based on the food buying guide. How do you know how much ham with natural juice provides 1 ounce equivalent of meat? The food buying guide indicates that you must serve 1.2 ounces of ham with natural juice to provide 1 ounce equivalent of cooked lean meat. How do you know how much ham with added water provides 1 ounce equivalent of meat? The food buying guide indicates that you must serve 1.22 ounces of ham with added water to provide 1 ounce equivalent of cooked lean meat. If you are crediting ham with natural juices or added water based on the actual weight, the meal does not comply with the requirement. Best practice is to obtain a product formulation statement with specific information from the manufacturer on how to credit the product towards the meal pattern. Cooked beans and peas, credit based on volume. Example, a 1/4 cup portion of cooked legumes equal 1 ounce equivalent of meat alternate. This does not include any liquid added to the product, for example, the sauce in baked beans. The serving must contain 1/4 cup beans, not including any liquid or sauce. For school-made foods, this information must be documented by the school's standardized recipe. For commercial foods, this information must be documented by a CN label or the manufacturer's product formulation statement. Local menu planners can decide how to incorporate beans and peas into school meals. These foods may count towards either the requirement for the meat alternate or the vegetable component. However, schools cannot offer 1 serving of beans and peas and count it towards both food components during the same meal. If a meal includes 2 servings of legumes, the menu planner can choose to count 1 serving as a vegetable and 1 serving as a meat alternate. Nuts and seeds cannot meet more than 50% of the meat alternate requirement at lunch. They must be combined with another meat alternate to meet the minimum requirement for each grade group. For example, schools cannot serve 2 ounces of nuts to meet the meat alternate component for grades 9 to 12. The menu could include 1 ounce of nuts, but must also include 1 ounce of another meat alternate. 2 tablespoons of nut or seed butters equal 1 ounce of meat alternate. Examples of allowable nut seed butters include almond butter, cashew nut butter, peanut butter, reduced fat peanut butter, sesame seed butter, soy nut butter, and sunflower seed butter. As indicated in the food buying guide, a serving of 4 tablespoons equal about 2.2 ounce weight of peanut butter, which equals a 2 ounce equivalent of meat alternate. A number 30 scoop of peanut butter equals 1 ounce volume of meat alternate. A number 16 scoop of peanut butter equals a 2 ounce volume and meets the meat alternate requirement for grades 9 to 12. Alternate protein products include vegetable-based protein sources and non-vegetable-based protein sources. Examples include veggie burgers, meatless chicken nuggets or patties, and soy hot dogs. All alternate protein products other than tofu and soy yogurt must meet the criteria specified in the USDA federal regulations for school meals. We will not review this information today as the requirements are complicated. However, the takeaway message is that school nutrition programs are responsible for obtaining documentation from the manufacturer for the alternate protein product used to meet the meat alternate component. Products that are CN labeled will provide information on how alternate protein products may credit towards the USDA meal patterns. Documentation can be provided by the manufacturer as a product formulation statement. Next, we will talk about the grain component. For all grades, schools must offer a minimum amount of grains daily and weekly. The amount varies by age grade group. For grades K to 12, at least half of the grain offerings over the week must be whole grain rich. The remaining 50% of grains must be enriched and measured in ounce equivalencies using weights and/or volumes found in Exhibit A of the Food Buying Guide for Child Nutrition Programs. An ounce equivalent is 1 single serving of grain for the school breakfast program and the National School Lunch Program meal patterns. One important factor to remember is that all grain servings do not credit in the same way. For example, it takes more weight for a cinnamon roll to credit as an ounce equivalent than it does for a slice of bread or a bagel. Here is a screenshot of the Exhibit A grain chart, which is part of the Food Buying Guide for Child Nutrition Programs. The ounce equivalencies used in the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program are found in the middle column of this chart. Here is a screenshot of groups C through F of the Exhibit A grain chart. Items in red are considered grain-based desserts. Please note that each category has a minimum weight per serving to equal an ounce equivalent of grain. Let's look at an example of using a food label and the Exhibit A grain chart to determine the ounce equivalents in one serving of animal crackers. Per the ounce equivalency chart or Exhibit A grain chart, sweet crackers, like animal crackers, fall under Group B. First, we will divide the weight from your packet per serving by the weight needed to produce 1 ounce equivalent for that particular grain product. In this instance, we will take 29 grams per serving found on the food label divided by 28 grams needed to create an ounce equivalent from the Exhibit A chart. This is equal to 1.04 or 1 ounce equivalent. One serving of this product is equal to 1 ounce equivalent of grain creditable to the menu. Remember, we always round down to the nearest quarter of a serving. The whole grain rich ounce equivalency chart is only used for commercially prepared grain products. If determining crediting of the grain contained in a recipe, a different process is followed. For instance, in a recipe for bread, if the ingredients listed 2 cups of whole wheat flour and 2 cups of enriched flour, the recipe would meet the whole grain rich requirement, assuming there is no other grains in this product. What are whole grains? Whole grains are grains that consist of the entire kernel, including the starchy endosperm, the fiber-rich bran, and the germ. Whole grains are nutrient-rich, containing vitamins, minerals, fiber, and antioxidants. All grains start out as a whole grain, but many are processed to remove the bran and the germ, which also removes many of the nutrients. How do you determine whether a grain is a whole grain? Labeling and advertising is often confusing and misleading, making people think that many foods are whole grain when they are not. Careful label reading is needed. If a grain is listed in the ingredient statement without the word whole, the product might not be whole grain. For example, corn, rye flour, and wheat flour. The menu planner must obtain additional information from the manufacturer to determine if grains with these terms are whole grains. If you see whole corn or whole rye flour and whole wheat flour, you know it is a whole grain. If you don't see the word whole, you will need additional documentation from your manufacturer to determine if these grains are whole. SFAs can use the following simple checklist to evaluate if a grain product meets the 50% portion of the whole grain rich criteria. Evaluate a grain product using the following 2 elements developed by the National Academy of Medicine. Element 1, a serving of the food item must provide at least 1/4 ounce equivalent of grain, as defined by Exhibit A found in the Food Buying Guide. And Element 2, foods must meet at least one of the following. 1, the whole grains per serving must be greater than or equal to 8 grams. This may be determined by information provided on the product packaging or by the manufacturer. Also, if a grain product contains a meat alternate, Manufacturers may apply for a CN label to indicate the ounce equivalent of grains in a food product. Or, number 2, the product includes one of the following FDA-approved health claims, such as diets rich in whole grain foods and other plant foods and low in total fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol may reduce the risk of heart disease and some cancers. Or, diets rich in whole grain foods and other plant foods and low in saturated fat and cholesterol may help reduce the risk of heart disease. And number 3, whole grains are the first item listed on the product ingredient list, with the exception of water. Documentation that may also be used as acceptable whole grain documentation can be a product formulation statement on manufacturer letterhead or a standardized recipe. Product formulation statements are developed by manufacturers to provide specific information about their products. They generally include a detailed explanation of what the product contains and the amount of each ingredient in the product by weight. Unlike CN labels, there is no standard information required for the product formulation statements. Also, they are not approved or monitored by USDA, and they do not provide any warranty against audit claims for reimbursable meals. Product formulation statements are available for many types of food products. CN labels are only for meat and meat alternate products, but can include information on grains, fruits, and vegetables if they are part of the meat alternate product. In summary, to determine if the product is whole grain rich, the product must contain either 100% whole grain or at least 50% whole grain, with the remaining amount being enriched. All grains that aren't whole grain rich must be from enriched grains. Enriched grains or refined grains and grain products that have vitamins and minerals added to replace the nutrients lost during processing. Enriched products are not nutriently equivalent to whole grain products because enrichment does not replace all the nutrients, fiber, and other health-enhancing substances originally present in the whole grain. Enriched grains have 5 nutrients added within limits specified by the Food and Drug Administration: thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, folic acid, and iron. We won't go into too much detail here, but there is also a limit for non-creditable grains. Only whole and enriched grains are creditable. Non-creditable ingredients cannot credit toward the grain component or the whole grain rich requirement. If grain products included these ingredients, they must be present at levels less than 2% of the product formula for the product to meet the whole grain rich definition. Because the crediting requirements are complicated, it is important for schools to ensure that all processed products used on the school menus comply. The procurement process is the best time to address the whole grain rich requirements and ensure that grain products comply with the limit for non-creditable grains. The bid specifications written for items to be used at breakfast are critical to ensure that all products meet school nutrition standards. It is also advisable to include a copy of the USDA product formulation statement for grains so that bidders are aware of the information required to document meal pattern compliance. Truly, procurement is immensely important in ensuring compliant food items for each of the component groups. Carefully written solicitations can help ensure your menu will be compliant. The daily milk requirement is 1 cup for all age grade groups. The weekly requirement is 5 cups for a 5-day week. Schools must offer at least 2 different milk choices, which include flavor variety and fat content. Unflavored milk has to be included in the milk options. Allowable milk options for school meals include fat-free unflavored and flavored milk, low-fat unflavored or flavored milk, lactose-reduced or lactose-free fat-free milk, lactose-reduced or lactose-free low-fat milk. Whole milk and 2% milk cannot be served. The only exception is dietary accommodations for disabled children whose disability results in a special dietary need, documented by a medical statement signed by a recognized medical authority. Milk substitutions are required for children with disabilities based on a medical statement from a recognized medical authority. In Louisiana, this is a medical doctor, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant. A note from a nurse does not qualify in the state of Louisiana. These substitutions do not need to meet the meal pattern requirements for milk. Schools have the option to offer milk substitutions for children without disabilities based on a written statement from a parent or guardian. If a school chooses to allow milk substitutions for children without disabilities, they must offer one or more of the following: either lactose-free or lactose-reduced milk, or non-dairy milk substitutes that meet the USDA nutrition standards for fluid milk substitutions. Milk substitutes must meet the USDA nutrition standards for fluid milk. They must also be included in the weekly averages for the dietary specifications. Schools should have a written policy for milk substitutions that is communicated to parents. Implementation of this policy must be consistent throughout the district. A frequent finding on administrative reviews or technical assistance visits is the service of water or juice as a milk replacement where children do not have a medical statement on file. Juice and water cannot be offered as milk substitutes for non-disabled children because they do not have the same nutritional value as milk. The next topic we will talk about is nutrient standards. In addition to the required meal pattern components, lunches must also meet dietary specifications. This chart shows the dietary specifications for lunch. These nutrient standards are based on weekly averages of all meals served, whether for a 5-day or 7-day week. The weekly dietary specifications include calories, saturated fat, and sodium. In addition, all foods and ingredients used in school meals must contain 0 grams of trans fat. Non-creditable foods are foods and beverages that cannot credit towards the USDA meal patterns for school nutrition programs. Schools and institutions may serve non-creditable foods in addition to the meal components to add variety, help improve acceptability in the meal, and satisfy appetites. Some examples include maple syrup on pancakes, salad dressing on salads, and condiments such as ketchup or mustard on a hot dog sandwiches and other entrees. Menu planners should limit non-creditable foods in the school menu. These foods often contain little nutritional value and are high in fat, sugars, and sodium. Menu planners should read labels and be aware of ingredients in foods and limit the frequency and amounts of less nutritious choices. Non-creditable foods that are often offered as part of a reimbursable meal must be counted towards the weekly dietary specifications. If non-creditable foods are served, they must contain 0 trans fat, and their inclusion cannot cause the menu to exceed the average weekly limits for calories, saturated fat, and sodium. The nutrition standards must be met on average over the school week. This means that the levels of calories, saturated fat, and sodium in any one meal could exceed the standard as long as the average over the week meets the standard. there are separate standards for both breakfast and lunch. For example, menu planners may be able to offer a meal or food that is relatively high in saturated fat or sodium at some point during the week, if meals with lower to moderate saturated fat or sodium content are offered the rest of the week. However, for trans fat, all food products and ingredients used daily must contain 0 grams of trans fat per serving. Saturated fat. Average weekly meals must limit saturated fat to less than 10% of calories at both breakfast and lunch. Schools are not required to meet a total fat standard. The dietary guidelines emphasize the type of fat consumed is more important than the total fat in terms of preventing diet-related disease such as heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Why are we concerned about children's saturated fat intake? Saturated fat, in particular trans fat, have the most negative health consequences, which is why the USDA dietary specifications focus on reducing these two types of fat. The next standard is for sodium. This chart summarizes the required sodium reductions at breakfast and lunch. You can see the gradual phase-in of the 3 targets for each grade group. The first sodium target took effect on July 1st, 2014. The second sodium target takes effect July 1st, 2024. Let's practice identifying a few lunch reimbursable meals. Is this lunch reimbursable for K-5 age grade group? 1 corn dog, which credits as 1 ounce grain, 1 ounce meat alternate, 3/4 cup of baked potato wedges, a half cup of mixed fruit, and 1 cup of milk, fat-free white, fat-free chocolate, or fat-free strawberry. Let's look at the K-5 age grade group. Yes, this meal pattern is reimbursable. There is half cup fruit, 3/4 cup vegetable, 1 ounce meat alternate, 1 ounce equivalent of grain, and 1 cup of milk with multiple varieties. Is this K-5 age grade group meal reimbursable? A half cup of homemade chili, which contains 1 ounce ground turkey and 1/4 cup kidney beans, 2 packets of whole grain crackers, which provide 1 ounce equivalent of grain, a half cup of Gordon salad, which provides a half cup romaine spinach mix, 1/8 cup of tomato, and 1/8 cup of carrot, a half cup of fresh apples, and milk choice, 1% white, and fat-free strawberry. Again, let's look at the K-5 age grade group. The answer is, it depends. If the kidney beans are being counted towards the vegetable subgroup, then yes, this would provide all the components required in the minimum portion sizes. If the kidney beans are being counted as a meat alternate, the meal would not meet the minimum daily requirements set for the vegetable component. Is this 6 to 8 age grade group lunch menu reimbursable? 1 chicken sandwich on a whole wheat bun, which provides 2 meat alternates and 2 bread grains, a half cup of vegetable sandwich fixings, which include a half cup of iceberg lettuce, which will credit as a 4th cup, an 1/8 cup of tomato, and an 1/8 cup of pickle, and then a half a cup of pear slices, and 1 cup of milk, fat-free white or 1% white. Let's look at the 6 to 8 age grade group. This lunch meal is not reimbursable. It only provides a half cup of vegetable when 3/4 cup is needed. Is this 9 to 12 age grade group lunch reimbursable? It includes a slice of pizza on whole grain rich crust which credits as 1.5 ounce meat alternate, 2 ounce grain equivalent, an 1/8 cup of red orange vegetables, a 1/2 cup of buttered corn, a 1/2 cup of steamed broccoli, 1 cup of melon, and 1 cup of milk, 1% white, fat-free chocolate, or 1% strawberry. Let's look at the 9 to 12 age grade group. This 9 to 12 age grade group lunch is not reimbursable. It only provides 1.5 ounces of meat alternate when 2 ounces is required. Now let's discuss a few tips for menu planning. Here are a few suggestions on ways to reduce waste. 1. Menus should reflect student preferences to increase consumption. 2. You can also consider smart lunchroom strategies, such as strategic titling of menu items and where and how they are placed in the serving line. 3. You can allow students to build healthy school meals, such as offering options within the same component, like a bagel or toast for breakfast. 4. Utilizing offer versus serve is another good way to reduce waste. 5. Shared tables are another example. However, remember that you will need LDH approval and a plan in place to reduce the risk of foodborne illness. And 6. Extending lunch periods may also help, as well as offering recess before lunch so children aren't tempted to throw food away to go outside and play. Important final National School Lunch Program questions. Are all components offered daily? Are all minimum daily portion requirements met for the age grade group being served? Are weekly portion requirements met for the grain and meat alternate? Are the weekly vegetable subgroup requirements met? Does my menu offer no more than 50% of both the fruit and vegetable components in the form of juice? Or at least half of all creditable grains offering whole grain rich? Or at least 2 milk choices offered daily? Signage is an important requirement of the child nutrition program. Schools must have signage to identify a reimbursable meal to students. Schools are required at or near the beginning of the serving line and prior to the point of service identify all of the food items that constitute a reimbursable meal both at breakfast and lunch. This is to help our students select foods that make a reimbursable meal in the correct quantities. State agencies and schools can design signage to fit the students, menus, facilities, and layout. Signage should also be age appropriate and visible and should include at least the short version of the non-discrimination statement. Frequently asked questions. May schools modify program meals for children whose disabilities restrict their diets? Yes. Schools are required by law and program regulation to make reasonable modification to meals and snacks for students with a disability that restricts their diet. Many meal modifications can be made within the meal pattern. For modifications within the meal pattern, FNS does not require a medical statement. Other students require meal modifications that do not fit within the meal pattern. In situations where a child requires a meal modification that does not fit within the meal pattern, a medical statement by a medical doctor, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant is required in order for the school meal to be reimbursable. May schools provide menu variations for children who have dietary preferences that are not disabilities? Yes, provided that the variations meet the meal pattern requirements. Schools are encouraged to plan menus that consider students' dietary preferences, including cultural or religious preferences. Must schools meet the meal pattern requirements on field trips? Field trips must meet the daily meal pattern requirements and count toward the weekly meal component and quantity requirements. Which meal patterns apply to preschool students? Schools are encouraged to offer students age-appropriate meals. Schools serving meals to infants and preschool-aged children must comply with the meal patterns for infants and preschool-aged children. However, when schools serve preschool children and K-5 students together in the same area at the same time, schools have the flexibility to offer a single menu using the K-5 meal pattern. May a school offer second servings of food items where the food is not claimed, just given? Yes, if the school chooses to offer second portions of any part of the reimbursable meal without an additional charge, these foods must count toward the weekly dietary specifications. If second helpings or second meals are sold a la carte, they do not count towards the meal pattern requirements and are subject to competitive food standards and non-program food requirements. If a school has multiple serving lines with different menu items, must each serving line contain all of the vegetable subgroups weekly? Yes. This ensures that all students have access to all vegetable subgroups throughout the week, regardless of the serving line selected. A solution would be to offer a salad bar at a central location where all students would have access. May a school use a food product that contains less than an eighth cup of vegetable? Yes. However, the school must offer vegetables in the required minimum amounts each day and over the course of the week from other sources to meet the daily and weekly vegetable minimums. Foods containing less than an eighth cup of vegetable do not count towards the meal pattern requirement. May unrecognizable food ingredients contribute to the meal pattern requirements? For example, carrot puree in a macaroni and cheese? Yes, pureed foods such as fruits or vegetables may contribute to meal pattern requirements as long as an eighth cup of fruit or vegetable is recognizable. Is there criteria for identifying grain-based desserts? Grain-based desserts are not allowed in the preschool meal pattern. For grades K to 12, up to 2-ounce equivalent of grain-based desserts per week are allowed in the National School Lunch Program. Are schools required to serve a whole grain-rich item every day? Yes. For grades K to 12, at least half of the weekly grains must be whole grain rich, and any remaining grains must be enriched. There are no daily whole grain rich requirements. Preschoolers are required to be offered whole grain rich foods in at least one meal or snack per day. Does the sodium limit apply to each meal offered? No. The sodium limit applies to the average meal offered during the school week. May schools offer water instead of milk? No. Fluid milk is a required component of a reimbursable meal. Program operators must not promote or offer water, juice, or any other beverage as an alternative selection to fluid milk in a reimbursable meal throughout the food service area. Does the juice limit apply daily or over the school week? For grades K to 12, the provision limits juice to no more than half of the fruits and vegetables offered applied over the week. May schools exceed the weekly maximum for the meat alternate component? Yes. School meals that exceed the weekly maximum limits are compliant, provided the meals on average meet the weekly dietary specifications. How are meals served in mixed age grade groups for RCCIs and small K-12 schools. If it is not possible to use the established age grade groups, program operators have some flexibility. RCCIs may use the 9 to 12 age grade group meal pattern at both breakfast and lunch as long as they have a signed request exemption form on file. Please contact the state agency if you have any questions about this exemption. Are RCCIs required to offer a milk variety daily? Yes. However, RCCIs that are juvenile detention centers or correctional facilities that serve children in different age grade groups may meet the milk variety requirement over the week rather than daily. For example, an RCCI may offer students flavored, non-fat milk on some days of the week and unflavored, low-fat milk on other days of the week.